figures, but as tools of an imperialist European Union to try to incite. And of course, there aren't enough Christians to incite. So the argument is that they are really tools to reach out to the Kurds and to the PKK. That really, what missionaries are doing is they are tools of outside imperial powers with a political function. If you read our Malatya report and you read what these youngsters were saying in court, and what they say they were saying when they were killing these 3 people, they were saying, you are working with the PKK. You are really tools of a terrorist organization. They weren't concerned too much about losing too many people of the Muslim faith. They were seeing the missionaries as a tool of an outside power. That this kind of rhetoric has substantially died down. Now, is that all reassuring? Not really, unless there is another element, which is that there's also a new debate in civil society. We've done a whole report on the debate on Armenians. It is an extremely mixed picture. There is still a lot that needs to change, and Amberin knows this better than anybody, in terms of Turkey having a completely open debate. But compared to 5 years ago, it is quite striking. I mean, the apology campaign that took place in 2009, the number of books that you have in Turkish bookshops now on history, films. Recently in 2009, a very popular film where the script was written by Etienne Makjopian on the pogroms against the Greeks in Istanbul. Seen by hundreds of thousands of people, one of the most popular films in 2009 in Turkey, which very openly shows the violence against Christians in 1955, instigated by elements of the state, and statements by different politicians. Very interesting when Prime Minister Erdogan was giving a speech talking about the fascistic mentality which led to the expulsion of the Christians. He said that at a party meeting. In the press coverage, people who are not friends of the AKP, like the former editor of Hürriyet, Ertuğrul Özkök, actually supported the Prime Minister on this point. And other people who are actually very critical of the AKP normally, on this point actually said, it is true, there were real problems with this part of our past. Now, all of this is clearly a picture where there have been setbacks. I don't think in 2004 anybody would have expected the kind of attacks, the kind of nationalist hysteria which took place later. But as part of the arrests which have taken place since 2000 and summer 2007, early 2008, many of these core people involved in these anti-Christian activities are now actually standing trial. Now, this raises a different issue, and I'm sure it will come up in the discussion about these other court cases, the Ergenekon court cases, and what has become of those. But it is remarkable that after the arrests of this core group around the Turkish Orthodox Church and Veli Küçük, and the people who appear also in our report as the leaders of these campaigns, violence against the Christian minorities has died down dramatically. I mean, if you go to the reports by the Protestant Association, they publish a report every year, you see the number of attacks. You really see a spike in 2007, and then it really tapers off. Now, what does all of this mean? I think one positive interpretation could be that the new Turkey is becoming more confident that the current political elite, for a variety of reasons, doesn't share the same sense of fragility of the Turkish state. That there is a sense that, in a way, Turkey doesn't need to be afraid of 2,000 Protestants or 2,000 Greeks or its neighbors using these minorities as tools to undermine the state. That it is actually possible to discuss the history in a more open way. Now, the slightly less generous interpretation could be that, in a sense, these groups are so small they no longer matter. That the real test will be how Turkey deals with the bigger groups of its minorities today, starting, of course, with the Kurds. But I think there is something positive happening, which is bigger, which is that the core vision of the founders of the Republic, born out of the trauma of how the Republic was created, which is that diversity is in itself a mortal threat to the state, which wasn't, of course, a Turkish peculiarity. I mean, the founders of the Greek state had the same vision. Many of the Balkan states were created with the same vision. I mean, this was a popular view of how progress. I mean, to create a society, you should have no internal divisions, nation building by an authoritarian position. That this view is losing its hold. And that even though in the last 10 years you see as many Atatürk pictures in school books or as many Atatürk busts in the public squares, the meaning of what Kemalism means is really being redefined. So if you look at, and I'm closing with this, at what's been going on within the Turkish military, and one of the big transformations of the last 10 years was the loss of influence of the Turkish military, then I think one reason for this has been that a military leadership that was so insistent on having a cohesive worldview really broke apart in its view of the world when it came to the issue of the European integration, because suddenly it was no longer clear what Ataturk would have said. So there were those who saw Ataturk as an anti-imperialist leader, against Western outside powers, and then of course the EU is a threat. And there were others who saw Ataturk as a Westernizer whose biggest goal in life would have been to take Turkey into the European Union. And then the EU is the culmination of his dream. And in between, you had a lot of people who were conflicted, who viewed the EU as a positive thing for Turkey, but didn't quite believe that you could give up the control that the military has had because of Turkey's many enemies. But this internal division, as we saw very clearly, meant that the military found it very, very difficult to intervene. Because you had Hilmi Özkök on the one hand having a vision that Ataturk is a Westernizer and democracy is something that is Kemalist and a good idea. And you had people like Mr. Kilinc, one of the last general secretaries of the National Security Council, who considered the EU a big threat, trying to undermine and destroy Turkey. And with all these different views, it was hard to form a cohesive view to respond to some of the changes in the last decade. Now, where does all of this lead us? We can discuss in the discussion. I leave it at that.